we get you again, we'll get started. I think the audio issues hopefully have been addressed. So thanks for your patience. Technical problems. Well, continue.
We were talking about the IE report, the way that it's identified there. To your knowledge, do the cost of labor materials for building capacity resources, including batteries, combustion turbines, increase between July 2022 and June 2024?
You say that again?
Sure. Do the cost of labor and materials for building capacity resources, including batteries, combustion turbines, increase between July 2022 and June 2024?
I don't know that we can speak that specifically. I think the important thing in the note is COD required by the RFP to drive cost.
But we did observe larger inflation in the market in 2022.
Subject to check, but again, that doesn't mean that the RFP is 22 that they're pricing it at that. I mean, the main point of an RFP is to defend the resource people. I'm not a developer, but that's what's really.
Yeah, I think also to add the increase in prices that we observed, it was well documented in the 235 RFP, are a function of the increase in demand across the entire industry. So it's really can't separate. It's not a function of time, it's a function of demand. So that demand materialized, prices increased as a function of supply and demand. That was not a result of exactly when the RFP documents were or weren't drafted or when it was or was not issued. It was just a result of the market dynamics.
Well, you knew there was demand back in 2022, right?
I think we've already discussed here that our perspective on demand in 2022 is quite different than our perspective of demand in 2023, 2024. And our need for the RFP evolved, and our regulatory process allows for flexibility to handle that change in landscape.
Sure, but the costs went up during that time period. That might have, and the financing costs as well, due to the rise in interest rates. Would it be even lower if we got the RFP out sooner?
I don't think we can speculate on what a developer will do, but again, the key in an RFP is when you're looking to deploy that resource. There was actually some feedback from market to go too early. There's two things. One, people may not bid if they're having to price it out too far, and plus they may put more risk on it if they're having to price it out that far. So there's always a give and take, but I think the most important thing, cost standpoint, when the resources need to be available, when they need to be deployed for when the RFP is issued.
Also, the RFP always contemplated a bid refresh period. That's a feature that was supported by the commission staff in the IE. And so even if we had rushed the bid at the RFP out sooner, the market would have called up and would have materialized in the refresh period because that was always intended to be later in the RFP process. So you just can't structure an RFP to try and time the market and cheat your way out of the real dynamics of supply and demand.
Has the company conducted any studies or research into whether this delay has caused any cost increases?
No, we haven't. I mean, again, the main point of an RFP is when the resources. So we haven't done so. Because again, developers aren't required to share what they may have done. And at the end of the day, if we ran the RFP in an amount of time to file for certification in the second half of 2025 after the
the costs are going up. Don't you want to get the bids in as soon as possible? If costs are going up,
if
that's important.
If you're bidding it in 2 years earlier, you may put more adder in there because I've got to wait 2 more years before I get the reward. So I can't speak from exactly what the developer to do, but I don't think you can just sit here and say, we'd run the RFP early, we got it.
I mean, isn't it true, though, that another effect of this delay is the company did have the opportunity to seek more capacity in 2024 than it otherwise would have solicited in the fall of 2022 and spring of 2023?
I disagree. The amount of megawatts that were requested through the RFP is based on the load forecast that we filed upon certification. So whether we had run it earlier or not, what could have happened is if we had it done earlier and we didn't know they may not have procured as much as we did. But the RFP has always been designed to meet the capacity needs at our present new file service.
Well, we could have filed for certification earlier, the RFP process.
Well, if we had, we may not have had enough resources because of load. And so the point of it is we've got 9,990 megawatts that we've identified to support the load grade that we've seen in the 23 RP update, 25 RP, and now Mr. Value is over 26. So that's it. That's what's at request here is
Nearly all of that is going to be company owned, right?
there a fair share of it is, yes, but I don't think you can sit here and I would say that's a good thing. I mean, like from the prior question about combined cycles, the company did in combined cycles because we need combined cycles to serve customers.
Going back to the bottom of that page 15 on the Axion report, Axion concluded the ship has sailed for a drafting process of this RFP, but the IE strongly recommends that the Commission direct GPC to engage with staff and the IE in a more timely manner in all future RFPs. You all agree with the conclusion that the company should engage with the staff and the IE in a more timely manner in RFPs and perhaps in general?
I believe that the company is engaged ongoing with staff and IE in RFPs that are coming up. As we plan, as we look at our loads, as we look at our capacity needs, we are continually engaged with them. And so we have several ongoing RFPs right now that we have worked very closely with staff and IE from the get-go on. So I think we are following this advice and we understand the need for timeliness.
I also wanted to ask some questions about the company's load forecast and some of your testimony in Mr. Valier. And I know we've discussed the forecast before in detail during the 2025 integrated research plan hearing, so I don't plan on going over the whole methodology in detail. But just to review, essentially there are two major components to the load forecast. The organic load forecast, which is based on econometric analysis of historical data, and the load realization model, or LRM, which is an upward adjustment from the organic model based on the probability of exceptional large load potential factors coming out of this, correct?
Yes, that is correct, Commissioner. And so if you think about it, the engine of what we're doing is the same. The structure and the logic is the same, but we have updated features. We have new customer information, and that's what between February
And the starting point for the LRM is a pipeline of potential projects, 100 megawatts or larger, that have been proposed to the company in one form or another.
That's correct. There's a threshold of materiality. So if the commercial customers is 100 megawatts or higher, and for industrials it's 45 megawatts.
And since the company adopted the basic LRM methodology in the 2023 RFP update, most of those potential projects have been AI data centers. Is that correct?
Yes, the pipeline has been consistent with the components of the pipeline has been primarily data centers. It has been a steady proportion throughout different companies.
And so whose value, I think, AI data center, the data center, yes, the big question, AI data center.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't make that distinction. So for hyperscalers, co-locators, the ultimate use is not something that you know, the needs for the future, the growth is kind of, you would anticipate that, you know, to contribute to that.
On its customer intake form, so the company does ask potential large load customers whether their project is AI related.
I'm not aware of all the details and subject to check. That could be something that.
And the development and adoption of the LRM and its use in the company and forecasting coincides more or less with the explosion of interest in investment in AI and large language models following the release of ChatGPT in November 2022. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, the LRM looks at a number of different probability variables to attempt to determine how much of the pipeline's total potential load will actually materialize in the company. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. And as I said earlier today, Commissioner, the load registration model tried to estimate the progression of customers through different stages by the use of probability. So from stage 1 to stage 2, there is a certain probability for each customer, depending on their particular conditions. And then from stage 2 to stage 3, there's another set of probabilities. And so the combined incorporation of the probabilities give you the odds of success or the failure.
At the highest level, the LRM looks at the probability of the project being successful, meaning whether the facility actually gets built, becomes operational, to be modeled as a binary event, correct?
Yes, that is correct, and that is the result of 3 customer decisions. The first decision is the selection of a site in the state of Georgia. The next decision is the signature of the contract with the company. And the final is a risk component that we include that tend to account for the probability of financial distress or economic sanction for.
And those 3 variables that you just mentioned, those are labeled as P1, P2, P3, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and then after looking at the project success, the model then looks at the probability of the actual meter load matching the announcement, right?
Yes, that meter load is how much a customer's announced megawatts will show up at the meter. And it's a condition that is measured at full load. So if a customer comes to us, contracts for 100 megawatts, but only 75 megawatts show up the meter, the materialization for that customer will be 75%. It's only one component of all the other components that we have to lower realization model.
And for that P1 variable, the state selection, just briefly, how's that calculated?
So that first probability is the first decision that a customer makes about citing their location in the state of Georgia. It marks the transition between a conversation that customers have between the state of Georgia Economic Development Department to the customer choice department at Georgia. Once they have identified site in Georgia, they indicate their readiness to move to the next stages of technical review that would allow us to get a more detailed estimate of their contribution to the total.
So the state selection is determined based on whether the customer has purchased or has not been purchased property in the state suitable for the project.
So traditionally, the state selection has been something that the customer has communicated to us. Once they work with the Economic Development Department for the state of Georgia and select a viable site, then Georgia Power has the information to technically evaluate that project. We don't require any site control proof for industrial customers. We started asking for site control for data centers starting this year. As a result of changes in rules and regulations, we wanted to make it more stringent. And since the growth, the majority of the growth in the pipeline is coming from data centers, it was appropriate for us to ask for proof. And so that was implemented this year.
So what is the probability of giving a project located in Georgia if the customer owns the property?
So it's not a probability, it's just a decision. So it's a binary event, right? So if the customer has selected a site in Georgia, if it's an industrial customer, and it has identified a location that is viable in our state, then that's the probability is 100%. And in the case of data centers, if they go the extra step, right, and they show us that they have site control via a contract or an option or lease, that is proof to us that they have control and we give them.
So it's the same whether you own the property or whether you have an option to purchase, right?
Absolutely, yes. And so once the customer, like I said before, this was a new requirement for data centers. Before they didn't have to do it. Now they're giving us more information, they're giving us proof. And so they're giving us more assurance. And so there's no change needed for that authority.
And the commissioner put its own option for a lease in an RFP, same thing, all of them.
But the probability to decide if you have any of those is 100%. I think I heard you say that the probability to sign for that variable for that customer is 100%. They show site control.
Right, once they show site control, we give them, we basically clear the hurdle, right? And so once they clear the hurdle, then there's no question that they're ready to jump into the next stages of, uh, of the technical evaluation. And so the, option that they use for site control, whether it's purchasing the land or leasing it or using any other instrument, it's a personal decision, it's a strategic decision if you would. And the company considers any form of control, a valid form of control to clear the hurdles and indicate that they're ready to move into the internal evaluation for the.
I mean, assuming we're dealing with a large company with a market capitalization of trillions of dollars, like Amazon or Microsoft, both of which have publicly announced their intention to develop AI products or platforms. If they were to purchase land in Georgia and under $200 million, does that model then assume that the customer has definitively selected Georgia as the project?
So I want to be careful, Commissioner, with the concept. So one, from an LRM perspective, what we're measuring is the transition from customer looking at different stages, right? And talking with our economic development department, and then getting ready to further explore the project development in the state. But the decision of the customer locating in the state of Georgia and finally signing a contract and being successful to close those meter, it continues to multiple evaluations. So this is just the first thing. So just want to be careful with the characterization that the customer has selected the state because the the definition of state selection means something very particular to us. But the overall success of the company depends on the customer signing the contract. And that doesn't happen until they post the actual, until they sign on those agreements, and it's going. There's so many things that they have to be proved for the customer to be successful. That we cannot just look at one component and evaluate the overall likelihood of this.
Okay, well, that P1 variable is called state selection. Also referred to in your motion.
That is correct. It's the selection of a site in the state of Georgia.
I want to look at the P2 variable as it's described on page 23 of the P2, P2026 forecast.
Oh, I think that's a local document contest.
I think it's part of it is tested.
We had filed this document as well, so I just wanted to.
Which takes that?
Page 23. Technical amendments. And I want to look at that P2 variable, which I believe is described in section 1.5.1.5.
Okay, perfect.
Electric service provider. Now, I think in a previous description of the ORM, you go back to the 2025 hierarchy, this variable was described as measuring the probability that the customer would choose Georgia Power for electric service. Presumably, it's like some other Georgia electric service provider, EMC or
Yes, that's the first statement, and that is something that we use into the February sensitivity. Because of the progression of the increases that we saw in the data center categories, we wanted to provide more certainty to the process. And so before we were using the likelihood of signing a request for service as an indicator of the likelihood of the overall project likelihood to be decided. But then because we now have a more formal way to track the progression of customers through internal technical review stages, we decided to make a distinction, and we decided to switch from the likelihood of signing an RSA to the likelihood of signing a contract, which is a more definite state, provides more certainty to the court. As a result of doing this, we are now requiring more hurdles to be cleared to advance from a low likelihood into a medium into a high. And so if you compare the megawatts that you have in the low likelihood bucket at the beginning of the 2025 RFP versus what we have now in the budget 2026 and the February sensitivity, we now have more megawatts in the low bucket, which means that the forecast is more aggressive, it's more stringent, and therefore more conservative in the way that's associated.
Today, it looks like the P2 variable is assigned based on how far the customer has progressed through that technical review process. Obviously, the highest probability is assigned to customers that have actually signed a contract for electric service, or CES. Slightly lower probability for customers that have submitted an RFS, but not yet signed a contract. A lower probability for customers that have completed a timeline review, but have submitted an RFS. Somewhat lower probability for customers that have completed a transmission study, but not a timeline review. And an even lower probability for customers that haven't yet completed a transmission study. And the lowest probability for customers that are on hold. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, I mean, really, this P2 variable is more about how far the customer has progressed through the technical review process rather than whether they're selecting the power or some other thing. Is that how the P2 variable is changed?
Well, again, it's proved for you commissioners that now we have something that used to be a somewhat expert-based evaluation into something that is measurable. So now we can show you which stages have been clear, and depending on where we are in those stages being improved, we assign a different level of likelihood. So it's something that we make from an operational perspective, more of a process, more of a procedure, and it's part of our continuous evolution and continuous improvement, right? So if we have something that right now we have many things that are based on informed judgment, right, which is customer information, experience. If we were to be able to start measuring things or converting certain processes into something that we can observe based on facts and report this one to the commission, we would do it. That's what we have done here with you.
I mean, does Georgia Power consider itself to be in competition with other Georgia Power providers, including the NCs and municipals, for these large load customers?
Absolutely, yes. After the customers have identified a site in the state, they talk to Georgia Power, they talk to EMC, they talk to competitors, right? And so we don't know if they're going to be selecting Georgia Power until the moment that they do formal selection to a request for to an RFP, right? And ultimately, the contract for electric service is what gives you the full certainty that they will have to service them. And it gives Georgia Power the obligation to serve and know that when this contract is being sent.
And remind me then, how is it determined whether a project is on hold? Is there a metric for that, or is that a subjective determination by the customer?
No, it's not a subjective determination, but there is judgment in the process, in the sense that customers are placed on hold when the progress starts. At any point, we expect customers to show a progression. Right? If they selected a site, the next thing they have to do is they need to show us zoning approvals. They need to sign an NDA. They need to give us, the actual updates that are controlled with the data center. And so, if customers don't show us that, then we get a warning. And it's something that triggers a conversation between the company and the customer to see what is happening. If there is no communication in timely fashion, but we consider that the project is still viable, we put them on hold. There is a communication to the customer that they have been placed on hold unless they comply with the 10 gigawatts that I mentioned in my summation earlier today, where customers that we approach proactively, we ask for this new rules and regs requirement. right? We asked for all of these things. They were not responding, so the first step was like, hey, we're gonna put you on hold, and unless you get us information, we're gonna have to get you out of the house. Then the next conversation was, well, when we heard from you, and that lack of compliance is gonna be a reason why we kick you out of the pipeline, and that's a
So, real quick, so you mentioned earlier there's roughly 10 gigawatts that have been removed. Would that have been the reason for some of those removals from the pipeline?
Absolutely. Some of them didn't sign an NDA, some of them didn't provide the ability to control. Some of them were not making progress, they were stuck on zoning approval. And so,
What about the 17 gigawatts? you mentioned? So, hold.
yeah, those are in sort of the warning category, right? So those are customers that right now are not fully declined, but there's a time component, for quote unquote grace period, if you would, that we give the customer to decline. But that is something that is evaluated on a case by case, right? Because just to give you an example, if we have a customer that is hyperscale and they're failing a certain stage of our group, and it's a reputable company, we will be willing to perhaps give them more time to comply. Whereas if there is a developer with no experience that is not showing the progress that we expect, we would have perhaps not been like. So there is an evaluation of the project viability done by the company within the process of moving somebody from being active into on call or being active into plainly withdrawal.
Is it fair to say that at this point in dealing with this last couple of years, y'all developed sort of a plan of action, how to deal with this, what prompts them to get held, what prompts them to get removed? And another question would be kind of based on what Mr. Pollock mentioned, he talked about earlier about what if, if the developer or the hyperscaler had already secured land and they started talking amounts. So, I mean, I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, but if they would have to have the land already secure before you can even start talking seriously about.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to have that type of goal, and that's why we want every data center now, talking with the company to have that type of goal, whether it's an actual purchase or an option to purchase later. As long as we have a binding agreement that gives them the rights to have control later down, that's something that we give them coverage.
Mr. Chairman, I think to your point about the list that we just moved through in terms of the stages that we use exactly improvement and strategy that we've made. And remember what we're doing here is all these projects are at different times. We're putting these factors on them so that value put them in a statistical model that is approximately important. So if somebody's not quite as far along down the line, then that's probably that load may not show up. Much less if somebody bought the land on the contract. So each one of them has that measure to be run a lot of 100,000 cases to give us a good forecast.
Well, Mr. Valley, they didn't tell you to help me out with that. Something there didn't make sense to me. I thought I heard you say that if a customer is a hyperscaler, it gives them more leeway in whether to place them on hold if there's a delay than a smaller.
Yeah, but it's basically an example that I was trying to give to commissioners in the sense of not every customer is the same. And so the assessment of viability of projects takes into consideration the experience of the customer doing what they're supposed to do. Right? So if you have somebody with a lot of experience building data centers, being in the space, there's a different level of certainty and our experts evaluate them according to their notes. That was my point.
Well, let's see what doesn't make sense to me about that is if the company is a hyperscaler, they're well financed, didn't you expect them to progress faster through the pipeline and technical review process than if they were a developer and they encountered hurdles?
It could be, but commissioners, we don't speculate on site, not because we have an hyperscaler, we're gonna say, okay, well, this is home run. versus a developer, and we would discriminate them. What we do is we have framework that is very specific on customer showing of progress through all the review. So the internal technical review process is the same process for all the customers. So it doesn't matter if we have different types of customers, as long as customers are progressing in giving us what they are supposed to give us, we will make them progress. We will sign a contract. It will be a credible counter. So it doesn't matter so much. It matters in the sense that when there is lack of progress, when there is like hurdles being encountered, that's where discussion comes. But in absence of those, the natural progression is what the asset proves to reflect the load in the load process.
You got a hyperscale that's delayed, not offering satisfactory explanation for that delay. Doesn't that indicate a probability that that hyperscale may be shopping around in other states with other projects?
That's absolutely a problem. That's a case that is possible, and it is definitely part of the framework. That's why we don't give them 100% solidity until they sign contract. So it is a possibility, and that's why, like Brad was mentioning, we generate 100,000 different combinations because that's definitely a thing. So we explore everything from this failure of everybody's complete success and everything in between to inform our case. So yes.
But we do not want to plan for all of them to 100%, and we don't want to plan for none of the cases, right? So it's somewhere in the middle, and so the process that we've had to be done over the last 2 years has been to capture all of those different risks, progress to the different levels of review. So we have a very good strategic approach at
Well, Mr. Valley, you mentioned contracts, and I'm glad you did. That's the ultimate focus is effectively a new process. Is a contract for electric service with the customer, correct?
So the ultimate goal is for the load to show up as the meter, right? So yes, when we have a contract, there is a financial obligation. There is a contractual obligation, right, between the customer and the company to execute and provide service. We have a small chance that even after signing a contract, the customer could go in front, right? So all the time, because we don't deal with companies below investment grade, it's something that is accounted into the lower APR. And also the materialization. Right? So they contract for a certain amount. Do we believe that they're going to pull every megawatt out of the contract? No, it's going to be something smaller than that.
But the ultimate goal being the contract is not that you serve based on contract. That's nothing to do. A lot more numbers to the ultimate goal is still the same.
So for the model, for the ORS, the highest probability area that two variable is when a customer has signed.
That is it.
I wanted to ask you a question and get an idea of where we are with contract for electric service at this point. On January 28th of this year, the commission approved the company's request to the community regulation to authorize contract requirements for minimum contract terms, payment security, and other customer guarantees.
That's right.
For loads over 100 megawatts.
And as part of the order, the commission ordered that companies shall exercise the discretion under the rules and regulations changes in manner designed to protect existing customers from bearing any costs added to the account.
That's great.
Go ahead. I mean, why would customers, why would existing customers, like some of the folks that we've heard from this morning, like Richard Johnson, or Devin Knowles, or Lena Meadows, why would they need protection from bearing the cost added?
Well, I mean, as this commission knows, as we went through the RP update, we started seeing the investments that were being required to serve these large loads. There was a need to add extra protection for those large loads, and so we've said for 2 years that increasing load puts downward pressure on rates for everyone, and that's the case because we priced them we sign contracts with them such that the benefit to those customers being added to the system are greater than the cost of adding these customers. But as the rules and regs, and the IRP update, we started seeing larger loads, we needed a protection. That's what the commission over the regs. So it is the way to put some more certainty around revenues for those large loads that wasn't there prior to it. And that's why it's important to all of them.
I mean, what happens if we don't have that certainty around those, providing those revenues from the park?
Well, the rules and regs gives us no more certainty. That was the point.
What happens if we don't have those? That's what I'm asking.
In terms of what?
If we didn't have that certainty, what is the risk of building billions of dollars?
Well, the risk would be that other customers pay for that. However, when you look at the amount of commitments that Mr. Valier has in his exhibit, and the rules and regs are clear, that it says that the costs are covered will be designed in the method, designed in a manner in which existing customers don't pay for large loads. So these contracts are to do that, and so that will govern everything we do on cost recovery. This filing is not about cost recovery, but if some of those actions happen, it would be a cost recovery discussion. But again, we've got 4.6 under contract. We've got 2 under the rules and regs contracts. We've got several more that we expect in the next few months. And so that the risk is that they don't show up, but that's exactly why the rules and regs were written.
I want to show you what I got is with an SPF CIA AIDS. So this was the conditions order from April 17th. I want to look at the second page under subheading 2 findings of fact. The first paragraph there.
Page 2, in which section?
Subheading 2 findings of fact. Okay. First paragraph. Petition reads, under the draft terms and conditions, customers would pay higher tariff rates or minimum bill amount. Each billing period air customer. Y'all see that?
Yes.
And what is a minimum bill? How is that different from the tariff rate?
So no one on this panel is involved in designing the cost recovery of the rules and regs contracts. My understanding is that our team that has done those has met with staff on them. And so I think that question is the better handled there. We can't speak to exactly what with our tariff rate the minimum bill, other than the minimum bill has the ability to project revenue regardless of the usage. But I don't think anyone on this panel can speak to all the details.
Okay, well, we're talking about the load forecast. Part of load forecast is all identified is writing those contracts. And contracts are at different terms, right?
Correct. The rules and regs contracts are what we're speaking to. You're asking for very
Well, that's what I'm asking.
specific. You're asking for very specifics on how the minimum amount is costing the thing.
And it's asking what the minimum bill and what's the tariff rate. So it's the issue of how it's defined.
At a high level, Commissioner, I agree with you, Mr. Grubb, we're not in that area to know exactly how it gets calculated, but at a high level, minimum bill is about cost to cost. Minimum bill is an established amount in the contract that gives you an amount that would ensure that the cost incurred by the customers on the system will be the cost. Now, it's about how it gets calculated, all that, the people. So that's overall the concept. And that's something that has governed the pricing in the Office of Contracts always. So it's always, we have conducted economic evaluations to ensure that the load that these customers are bringing passes what is called the great impact measure, the green test, which means that they're bringing revenues above their incremental cost being shared. And so the guarantees and the principles behind, behind the contract are always been there. What happens now is that with the implementation of rules and regs, we have additional protections. The minimum bill is one of them, that is going to cover for, performance in a more, free set of conditions.
So it's a form of guarantee, is that correct?
I don't know the legal ramifications of calling something a form of guarantee to Mr. Value's point and reading this tariff rates, it would be whatever rates customers on, whatever usage is in that month, it would pay that, or if it's not enough to cover the cost. But, I don't know. You say a form of guarantee, it's a minimum amount of revenue per the contract that the company will cover.
So in addition to protecting rate tariffs, I would assume that having minimum billing provisions would also provide incentives to large load customers to actually use electricity under the tariff rates up to the amount of the minimum bill and increase the likelihood of that load materializing as forecasted.
Again, Commissioner, the purpose of the minimum bill is not to incentivize usage, is to ensure that we have cost recovery. Now, I can see the angle where if you're paying for something, you may have to use it. And but that's not the purpose of the minimum bill. The minimum bill is not to make, or to enforce usage on customers to ensure recovery. Because when we do that, we protect our existing customers from any cost increases cost by this act.
Yeah, the customer's incentive is going to be if you have to be, you have value points. If for some reason they're not supposed to, we need to revenue standpoint.
If the contract didn't include the minimum billing guarantees over the term of the contract, that would presumably decrease the probability of the load materializing as forecasted of the problem, right? I did refer to the load forecast, Mr. Chairman, and that's how I phrased it. I'm not sure what the
And
intention
you
is.
answer what he had that.
So state your question again in terms of, I think what you may have been asking was, do we treat the load forecast risk or probability differently if there was or was not in the bill?
Well, the highest probability of a Q2 variable is contract for electric service, correct? And if the contract were to include minimum bills, that would increase the probability of the customer using that electricity, correct?
That's not the way it works in the load regulation model. So what we do is, once the customer has signed a contract, we know what is our contractual obligation to the list. Then there is an assessment of materialization. Because for every megawatt out there, we know that only a portion of that is going to fill up the need. So that portion is what we plan to serve. And so the forecast is developed with that. The forecast is developed assuming that we have to serve the customer needs according to the contract we rated for materialization, that are reasonable to inform.
So Commissioner says we talked through, so that means that they selected the state, they selected their power, and they've gone through everything they need in the contract. So the likelihood of that load shows up is crazy. And whether it's in the bill or not, we still accept that. So when you sign a contract, that customer's done everything they need to do. That's why it's happening.
Well, maybe this helps out. If we go to the second sentence of that findings of fact in the order of this, it's more detailed description of the minimum bill. It says, if the customer ended the contract early, the customer would be liable for the minimum bill amounts, not the tariff rate amounts, for each period for the remaining term of the contract. You don't see that?
I'll try to reword that. And move on.
Sure. Let me show you what the marks is, to the SPS, so this is a press release from the company titled Georgia Power highlights first contracts under new rules and regulations, continued economic growth, and updated forecasts and local filings with Georgia PSC. Yeah,
All 2 pages. Yeah,
Okay.
I went to Georgia Tech, I read it. Do math, read things.
Right. Georgia Power has I'm looking at the first paragraph, press release, where it says, Georgia Power has filed nearly 2 gigawatts of new customer contracts with the Georgia Public Service Commission, marking a major milestone in the these agreements are the first in reach, and the Georgia PSC immediately approved rules and regulations which are designed to provide Georgia Power flexibility and to serve large customers and safeguarding residents and small businesses. Now, first of all, congratulations on reaching that milestone. I do want to ask some questions about this contract. And I know you said that you're not familiar with all the details of the contract, which you did public press release. You might know something about it. There's not a lot of detail in this press release. I mean, how many contracts is it they had to sign here?
My understanding is that 3.
And have those contracts now been executed, you know?
I believe 2 have been approved by staff. I think 1, is the timeline is this week. I don't know what the execution tax is. I'm not sure if the process is approved and executed or executed.
Now, my understanding of the commission order is the staff has the right to reject. Are you also saying that staff has the authority to approve these contracts?
Well, there was a letter saying they agreed that it met the requirements of the president.
Is that for
I don't
all,
remember exactly what the legal.
is that for all 3 contracts? Or is that is that for all 3 contracts that the letter applies to, or is that for?
I believe it was, Mr. Chairman, we are not involved in all the details of the rules and regs contracts, what the calculations are and all the provisions. What we are saying is from a load forecast and a resource certification process, having those contracts executed on the rules and regs is much more certainty on the cost of cover most of that. It would be the point of the rules and reg effort. So Mr. Pollock's asking about all the details. We have an entire group dedicated to that. They've had discussions with staff. And that process is in place under the commission rules and regs. What we're saying here is from a load forecast standpoint, Mr. Valdez talked about how it's factored in. And the other question we get around cost recovery of these resources as you have a contract executed and approved, et cetera, whatever we use, there's more certainty of all things. That's what we
Call it. Try to push it into this panel expertise level in terms of what they were involved with. And I know staff's been more involved in a lot of these contract discussions than you folks on this panel.
I do believe it is relevant to this discussion of whether it's going to materialize. The precise terms of some of these contracts, protections that are in them. So, I mean, we disagree that it's not relevant to these meetings. I understand the panels. But I would like them to answer to the best of their knowledge.
I would object to that. If you can, if there's something else you can.
Well, yeah, actually, yeah, so I think what I was laying out, we're able to answer from the standpoint of how that's what we don't know, detail of the discussions on the contracts and these types of things. What we're speaking to is the higher level of certainty and value that we can model. And then on the standpoint of you're asking for the resources, the more contracts you have, the more formula will be raised. That's what we do, include the details of process and order and requirements and all that stuff.
Well, let me ask you, in the model, there's a probability to find when the customer has a contract for a correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, some of those contracts came into being before the rules and regs changes. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And the rules and regs changes did something. They increased. They did something. Correct.
Yes, it provides protection to existing customers.
You're just not sure what the details are.
No, when we've spoken to the minimum bill is one area of more protection, longer return contracts, financial security, and those types of things. But the contract for electric service that for anybody under 100 megawatts that we've used for decades, continue to use, has protection for customers. The rules and regs added protection above that for local government. And so those four areas that are in the order about what we can do under rules and regs for loads that are under 100 megawatts is an extra level of
Kevin, this is where I have an issue here. I mean, he says on the one hand, he's familiar with the minimum billing requirements, and on the other hand, he's not.
I'm familiar with that you have minimum requirements. I can't speak to how they're done in the contract.
From a load forecasting perspective, the commissioner, contract is a contract. An obligation, regardless if it has more or less loss. Right, so now, the new contract has more protection for the customer, but it is binding obligation for the company to deliver. And so whether there is a link between those processes to the actual load forecast, that's to me, that's something that I don't see the connection. It's, there is a legality, there is a certainty. So from a forecasting perspective, I care about the certainty of the load that I have to share. And a customer that is prospective, that is going through the technical review process versus a customer that has a contract. I think that's with a company with more certainty. That's what I consider within my sense. That's
So if it's a 50 megawatt data center, the time the contract that doesn't have the new rules and regs added to it, you're still obligated to survey these things before property to be certainty for the 500 megawatt contract. The rules and regs is much more around that cost recovery certificate. I think what these values things any customer that signs a contract, and pick the state, pick the file, they sign a contract, we are gonna claim it.
Well, let's say I'm a commercial lessee and I want to enter into a business lease. If I negotiate with the landlord and enter into a lease with a termination provision where I can walk out on the lease after 2 years, as opposed to a lease commitment for 10 years, does that not make it less probable that I'm still going to be around with 10 years? You know what I'm saying?
I didn't follow how that applies to the hearing.
Well, there's a difference in contract terms. They're not the same contract, right? If you have a 2-year lease versus a 10-year lease.
Right, so again, the moving rate are adding the contract aspect to it. The contract still has protection, so, from a load forecasting point, we're assuming those customers contracts, we're going to plan to serve them. We're not planning on them terminating or canceling anything. They signed a contract, we have an obligation to serve them.
But his contracts are signed for 10 to 15 years. So it's not something that is signed for the next 2 years. This is like longer term. So it's a long term. Not something that is.
That's the real, not your executive, but that is the real business, take into account all the studies that have been done with the length of the negotiations in terms of what it's going to take to provide the generation, distribution, transmission, everything based on all those costs, studies. And that is our understanding. We understand that is done, but we're saying we can't pick all the details of how that.
It's meant to cover, so if a data center is coming to our state, it signs a contract with us. We are gonna make sure with the minimum bill requirements that the cost to serve this load, the incremental cost to serve this load are paid by this time. And they're not passed. We're protecting it. That's the purpose of the meeting.
If only 1.9 gigawatts of that contracted service has been.
Yeah, but the other things are still under contract.
On the same level of protection as the 1.9 gigawatts.
The rules and regs clearly to add a higher level of protection. All the other contracts have protection.
There's more than half of this 4.6 gigawatts of existing before losing rates, more than half of the megawatts have what is called a MAC rate, a monthly access charge rate that is paid by the customer regardless of the consumption. So there are protections. It's just that rules and regs provide us with additional protection, right? It's when the growth started to pick up, when we needed to start making investments, we've added those.
And the contracts for electric service that are below 100 megawatts are the same contracts that we've been in place for decades, that have been out of the state of Maryland. And we've been in place for electric service.
Isn't it true that we were, if not the first state to adopt these type new, much more strict regulations on marginal customers, or it's not the first, or one of the first? That's correct. Yeah. So I think we're probably active much as fast as possibly good when all this takes place, but at the same time, I think it's calling for us, and the question is there a difference between the contracts that were done prior to the new regulation and those that you've answered that?
There's a difference on the rules and regs having higher level protection, but there's no difference in terms of how we are obligated to serve those customers and how we put them in our plan. Because if you're below 100 megawatts today, you're going to sign the same contract somebody signed 2 years ago, 6 years ago. There are protections in there that has allowed us to plan for the slow growth. Rules and regs is an extra level of protection.
All right, let's move on.
I want to go back to the speculation. Skipping down to the third paragraph, it says, Work Power remains in active negotiation with multiple large load customers representing several additional gigawatts of potential demand. Do you know?
Yes.
How much is several additional gigawatts? 3, 3, plus 3.
We don't know. Again, there's another group handling that. And I'm not sure we would share what's potential out there in terms of lots anyway, great cheap wise, but we know there's several, but we did not know the names.
All right, looking at the next paragraph, second sentence, where it says, combined with continued progress on new customer contracts, this outlook further supports the company's request to certify approximately 9,900 megawatts of new capacity resources due to all source RFP. How does 2 gigawatts of contracts and several additional gigawatts potential demand get to nearly 10 gigawatts of new capacity?
So this talks about demand. So the 10,000 megawatts, 2,000 of that is for PPA expirations, like I mentioned in my summary. The demand is what we're looking at here is 8,500. The 9,900 covers load growth, reserve margin, and PPA expirations. The point of this press release is, as we've gone through the last 2 years, commissioners, with bringing the 23 RP update, seeing the increased load forecast, all those types of things, we continue to put more and more certainty around that load forecast, and these contracts do exactly that. So the point of this is that as we continue to get questions in these proceedings around how the load is going to be there, every one of these steps is more certainty that that load is there and the resources.
After the P2 variable, probably expected to answer it. Let's assume hypothetically, what would happen if this P2 variable had only 2 potential probabilities? Let's say 100% probability for customers that sign a contract for lack of service, and a 0% probability for customers that have not signed. Simple binary choice. You all understand my hypothetical?
Yes, in that hypothetical scenario, commissioners, will be really dangerous because we would not be planning for growth. We would be only considering customers with a contract. And we will jeopardize the liability, they will close to the close of the state, and Georgia would not be a top state for doing business anymore. We have always planned for growth. For residential, commercial, industrial customers, this is no different. And so if we were to do that technical grid of assigning zero probability for anything without a contract, then technically you are excluding everything that doesn't have a contract from the load.
There was a meeting and a hearing held by the Georgia House of Representatives Special Committee on Resource Management, Subcommittee on Energy on September 4th. To discuss the state's electricity, I believe Aaron Mitchell attended and gave a presentation on behalf of Georgia Power. You all remember that?
I was not part of the presentation, was not at that meeting.
There was also a representative from Georgia ENC, Jeremy Nelms from Flint Energy Institute, to discuss the ENC's approach to long-term planning and the ENC's official load forecast that gets submitted to the federal government. I don't know if any of y'all managed to catch any part of the presentation. During this discussion of the ENC's official load forecast, Mr. Nelms asserted that their forecasting did not include, quote, speculative large power loads, which he described in the presentation slide as loads not in the contract. Are you all aware of that? Obviously, not including large loads not under contract in the forecast is a significant departure from Georgia Power and its forecasting the LRM, correct?
Based on that face value of what their comment was, but I think the important thing here is, commissioners, as Mr. Valiant said, if you step back all the way to the 23 RP update, what we've been able to do to enable growth and get all the seniors and customers is the cause we project. As Mr. Valiant said, residential, commercial does every forecast that's projected load growth, and it's not contracted. So we have the vast majority of the load growth we're asking for is under contract or has a commitment from RFS, and Mr. Valiant did show. So I can't speak to why the MC would do that. I think from our standpoint, by being able to plan for this large load growth and in parallel planning for it, knowing the cost of it and being able to execute those contracts, the process is working exactly like it should. That's what has enabled us to have this type of growth that will put downward pressure on rates.
Our power plant commissioners keeps the lights on, right? keeps rates affordable because this customer is doing more megawatts to spread out costs. So it's good for its customers. It keeps Georgia the nation number one state. So, what other companies and other, um, um, regions are doing is basing their needs. We are presenting with something that supports the growth of our state and is the best alternative for our city.
So you guys did three days before we didn't see those are
I cannot answer for them. I mean, they have to do what is right according to their planning process. And so it could be related to size. It could be related to multiple factors. So I'm not familiar with the strategic views of that particular presentation. But I can only talk about what really is the data.
We also don't know the nature of that contract. We don't know anything of the
And has your power had any conversations with those before from PSC or EMC about how they do their forecasting? Or to gain some insights from listening to fellow work companies?
Personally, no, I have not. I've been in conversations with other utilities across the nation. I've been reading, literature, reviewing things, and so I'm generally aware of what's happening across the nation, but nothing specifically.
Now, under the LRM, if the model determines that a project is successful and likely to complete it, model then forecasts the probability that that metered load or the actual load that materializes will match the customer's announced or intended load. Is that correct?
No, it's gonna be lower than the announced load by the materialization percent.
Looking here at page 25 of the E2026 load energy forecast.
Page 25, you said?
25. Technical.
Okay.
There are different load materialization probability assumptions that are assigned to particular projects based on the nature of the potential customer's business, including whether the customer is a data center hyperscaler, co-locator, developer with data center experience, and a developer without data center. Correct?
That is correct. But that's one of the differentiations that we included in the February sensitivity to make a more stringent set of assumptions for data center developers and co-locators with no tenants to reflect the expected occupancy rates versus hyperscale.
And I know we discussed this during the company development testimony in 2025 IRP, but I just wanted to make sure. Hyperscaler means a large, well-capitalized company with an established customer base capable of scaling up the products and services for worldwide customer base very quickly, correct?
I think they're well capitalized customers across the spectrum.
Well-capitalized, that's the main criteria for being a hyperscaler.
No, it's about the business and having the final use for
To have a product that actually use it for.
right.
And a developer, I guess, would be a smaller private business that's more reliant on outside investors for capital. Some experience in real estate development projects, but not necessarily experience in building data centers. And also without its own products or established company, that's the way of describing it.
So, Mr. Paul, you referenced the 2025 RP rebuttal testimony. Are you reading that from our testimony, or are you?
That's just how I characterize it. I decide what I remember from the 2020.
I was just making sure if they were referencing.
That's just how in my mind I think it's developed.
Want to make sure.
We all
Thank you.
disagree.
I don't think a developer is necessarily small or inexperienced or not well capitalized. They don't have the direct computational need that the hyperscaler has. So it doesn't mean you're not a legitimate enterprise that can be trusted to execute on the business model. If their business model is developing data centers for other people that have a direct computational need to participate.
Well, let me show you a couple of examples that I think are developers, and maybe that'll help you out. Chairman. And this is a trade secret document, so it'll not be provided for requested, you know, record. So without going into the specifics of the document, this is a data center project intake form submitted to the company by a potential customer towards the beginning of this year, correct?
Yes, so this is a new document that is needed for every customer to join the large load pipeline. And so, yes, it has, I mean, it has like almost 100 questions, 111 questions that needed to be provided.
And are you aware that the potential customer shown on this form has a website which identifies the customer as a property company and lists a portfolio of projects in operation or in planning construction phases, all of which are either warehouses, distribution centers, office parks, or truck parks?
No, is that in any other questions that they got to?
It's a website.
I don't think anybody said we need that website. They,
Are you aware if this customer has any experience building data centers?
So I don't know what this particular customer is. Well,
we also haven't read the full document.
Can you point us to a number, a
Somewhere.
question number that has that information?
I'm just asking if you know. It's just one of the
well,
customers in the pipeline.
not at the top of my mind, but I'm sure if we were to talk with the experts in our customer choice department, that the project managers will know all the details.
Okay, and but to be clear, this company and its project is included in the company's large forecast. Is that correct?
Oh, and have to look at the pipeline, but yes, I will have to check.
Going back to those categories, the developer, hyperscaler, I'm a little bit less clear about what a co-locator is. I assume that means a company like Flex Central or QTS, Flex Central, I think that's some representatives here this morning. And I think they identified themselves as a co-locator. That has experience in building data centers and a network of potential tenants that could be contracted to utilize the computing power of the data center once it's operational. Is that a good way of describing it here?
Yep.
Now, going back to my previous question, why does the LRM distinguish between hyperscalers, co-locators with or without tenants, and developers with or without data center experience when it comes to load materialization across the market?
Because it's the appropriate thing to do, Commissioner. So we have, so a simple way to explain what a co-locator is that company that builds the facility, some of them even have the computers in their facilities, and they provide the service to companies that need those services, right? If a co-locator comes with a specific megawatt count, and they don't have committed tenants for their facilities, well, there is uncertainty of how much of that load are they going to fill. That's what we are lowering the materialization. Okay? Same thing for developers. These are viable companies. They are in the business of building data centers, but they don't have the ultimate use, right? And so it is appropriate to, discount. Now, typically, developers sign contracts and they convert into hyperscalers. There is an evolution, right? And so, um, so the customers are represented with the information that we have in front of us and risk adjusted accordingly to them. And so the differentiation that we're talking about here is really to account for that occupancy, right? And so when we saw in February of this year, when we saw that the pipeline went from 25,000 megawatts to over 48 or so, the majority of that increase is coming from developers in qualitative development. And so based on that shift in the marketplace, we deem appropriate to penalize them because, you know, the supply and demand was growing a little bit faster than traditionally what the traditional.
So something that really strikes me about making a sense, and maybe you can help me out here, is doesn't the nature of the customer, whether it's a hyperscaler like Microsoft or Google, or a developer with or without data center experience, impact the likelihood of the project being successful? In addition to whether the bidder does grant to the announced load?
It absolutely does. So if a customer comes with no experience and they want to get through the process and they don't provide us with proof that they have the experience, we were not going to let them get the transmission studies approved. We're gonna reflect it into this P2 probability.
Okay, but that's not reflected in the P2 probability, right? I mean,
It is implicitly.
implicitly.
I mean, yeah, because it's, you know, the P2 probability measures progress through stages of technical review, right?
But a Microsoft and a developer could be at the same stage of technical review, couldn't they?
Yes, based on their merits,
Right?
right?
They would be treated the same under whether the project is successful.
Absolutely. If they,
Even though one has lots of money and experience on projects and the other does not, correct?
but that is a different risk. That the fact that some company may be better capitalized than others, it's a financial risk. And so that is evaluated with a different probability that we measure that. And we have based our assessment on the default rate for investment grade companies. And we have made that assumption a little bit more conservative than what rating agencies have provided. So, yeah, I would disagree with the statement because capitalization and experience may not be real.
So you say the P3 variable captures it, is what you say?
The P3 captures the risk of economic distress, financial downturn, and it's a single number that is applicable to the whole industry.
Okay, what's that threshold of the P3 variable?
The number is trade secret, but when you say threshold,
It's the minimum, credit rating for a company to qualify.
subject leaders to the union. Subject.
So that triple B minus, that could still include some developers and really the hyperscale.
I don't know the compensation of the, I know that we have minimum set of financial health for us to keep the business. We part of the interest for part of the onboarding is the need to provide financial.
Now, the B 2026 load forecast was prepared based on data from the company's large load pipeline at the end of Q2 2025. Is that correct?
It was actually taking the pipeline of Q2, but we made some adjustments all the way to mid-August of this year. But it was a pipeline as of Q2 with tweaks and information available as of middle of August.
Yeah, I want to show you the list of projects in the large load pipeline is provided as part of the company's Q2 2025 large load report. Mr. Chairman, if you could have them.
Go ahead.
You don't need to review the whole thing, it's a list. I wanted to ask, about one project in particular, looking at the first and the second pages, the seventh project down from the top. Yeah, I mean, I believe that if you look at.
Yeah, page 116,
There's one,
it says that.
seven project. It's all Tracy.
Okay.
Just to make
Okay.
sure, is that the one on Cobblestone City?
And that's great, so you can, so at the end, it'd be a lot easier if y'all allow us more information here, but
You know, it's customers.
number seven,
Okay. Okay, I got you.
the one to that.
How long you get?
Yes, probably, it's listed as a commercial data center inside Georgia Power Service Territory, now it's sold 1,200 megawatt.
Um,
Give me a second.
yes.
Now, this project is one of the contracts that has the lowest spending staff. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that's right.
The peak load that was identified in that contract, for that project, it was 1,200 megawatts. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, what is the actual amount of load set forth in the contract itself?
It was lower than that. I don't know, I'm sensitive about disclosing customer information, but it was lower than that. Well, if I give you a map, I'll give you.
I'll try to keep.
Let's say below 1,000.
Well, so that is a reduction in the load, that would result in a reduction. In the the forecasted decline versus what actually.
In the load forecast, not necessarily. So in the forecast, you will have two effects happening. So one is a reduction from, so we reflected this load as highly likely. By the time that we did the forecast, the contract came after the thing. And so, that reduction in megawatts is offset by an increase in likelihood. So there's a 7 times for this particular.
Um, on page 15, and I'm sorry, page 17 of your testimony, lines 5 through 11.
Page 17. Okay, excellent.
The question was, did the company meet with the commission staff to collaborate on the load forecast following the 2025 RFP? Yes.
Yes, sir. Okay, perfect. Okay, so
And your answer was, yes, prior to file, 2026, load forecast, and the company met with commission staff 3 times to discuss the company's refinements to its load forecast process and assumptions, and to consider staff's feedback and propose revisions to the load forecast. The company will continue to be with commission staff during the proceedings to further collaborate and respond. This was something that was ordered by the commission, that the company collaborated with staff.
yeah, that's correct. This is part of the 2025 IRC stipulation that we need to have this collaboration with
I wanted to show you the document now, Mr. Chairman. This was a memorandum from the staff to the company. Dated September 11th, 2025.
Yes,
This was a part of that collaboration process.
that is correct.
Right, so staff's recommendation, one staff recommendation that will be there under contract execution and materialization requirements. Staff, and this is not a trade secret document, it contains trade secrets. It runs their approach to it, I'm not providing this to the quarter. Given the list of existing taxpayers and the speculative nature of these projects, the company must provide executed contracts for electric service for all large load customers prior to the certification associated capacity use. Oh, it's fine. I summarized the next one. Staff's recommendation is reflected in the number of the company that said, as part of the load materialization model, staff recommended that no generation asset certifies the next there was contracts that certified. Is that correct?
That is correct, Commissioner. And again, I'm gonna reiterate what I said earlier. Adopting that assumption would severely under forecast our load. It would underestimate our estimate. And just to go a little bit farther, we study and we took staff recommendation seriously. We look at all of this input. We look at all of the recommendations in detail. And their approach double count risk factors in the load realization model. It only focuses on contracted load, which would drive our projection for large loads down to about a gigawatt. If we were to implement all of the recommendations, we would be talking about something close to a gigawatt, which would drive reliability down. It represents only less than 20% of our contracted load and less than 10% of our commitments. The gap that we're seeing in this recommendation is not a rounding error. It's the philosophical difference between planning for growth and benefits to our customers versus planning for a resource constrained system. And so this recommendation would really jeopardize system reliability, it undermine our ability to serve our customers. Georgia's economic development depends on a power system that anticipates growth. So just for the get-go, looking at the recommendation of only looking at contracted loads, it undermines our growth prospects in the future attractiveness of our state for being the number one state for doing business.
And commissioners, if we had followed this and waited till everything was signed for contract election service, we would have never come forward in 23-hour update saying there is a lot of large loads coming to the state. If you remember, it was maybe 1,000 megawatts at that point. And that was RFS and everything. So we saw this new sector of the economy that is growing, that we saw indications it was coming to Georgia. We forecasted that. Mr. Valier developed a large load model. The whole process, the 23-hour update, the 25 IRP, adding the capacity RP, resource capacity range, all of that, and now getting contracts, put down pressure rates on everybody, we would be 2 or 3 years behind because every forecast has projected growth. And yes, it's a bigger impact here, but if you only waited until it was executed, we would not be able to grow. If they had, you can build load growth faster than you can build duration. So we've got to stay ahead of it. The other part that would be difficult is the reason we're able to calculate the cost in the rules and reg contracts to make sure that we're covering the costs is because we are planning for that load. We know what resources and projects are needed to serve that load. If you waited to plan, you wouldn't even have any numerical information to provide the customer with the cost. So the way that we've done it, the way that this commission's process allows us to forecast it and improve resources is what's made from the growth and allowing that momentum.
The company performed, and I'm going back to the RFP process now. So I think we're done with those one. Appreciate all your stuff. The company performed a confidential rating analysis as part of the RFP evaluation. That analysis compared the costs and benefits of the resource alternatives, recognizing that some projects would be more cost effective and hence more attractive to select first compared to others. That's correct.
The company did perform an evaluation based on the criteria that was agreed upon with the commission staff and the IE. And that evaluation is very informative in the cost effectiveness of the resources and provides a ranking of resources relative to one another.
And conversely, based on the ranking analysis, there are some projects that would be less cost effective. It would be economic to defer those to be selected later in favor of more economic projects that wound up higher in the ranking analysis, correct?
I don't think the ranking analysis suggests that some projects should be deferred. The company's position is that we should select all the projects that are needed to meet the load forecast. And projects that aren't needed to meet the load forecast should not be selected. Projects that are needed to meet the load forecast should be selected. We have a ranking that helps show the relative positioning of those and provide an ultimate short list of resources for a portfolio certification.
You'd say that the average cost of the portfolio on an NPV dollar per megawatt basis goes up as more of the less favorable projects are selected.
Again, I don't think we have any less favorable projects. They're a very robust portfolio of projects that meet the capacity. Generally speaking, they are ranked from least costly on a net basis to most costly. And one of the components that might make a project on the higher end of the rank less cost effective, more costly would be fixed costs, but there's a lot of things involved in the ranking: fixed costs, energy benefits, term utilization. So it's difficult to isolate any one of them without holistically looking at the results of the portfolio.
And I also have a few questions about the PPAs. The company is requesting additional sums of PPAs that were identified based on public solicitation and were identified as supplemental resources outside of the competitive.
Yes, we're asking for the additional sum on all of the PPAs filed for certification.
And these PPAs include both thermal, renewable, storage resources, and some of these resources may provide seasonal or ELCC adjusted capacity value system, which is less than the nameplate capacity, correct?
Can you go through that one more time? There's a lot in there.
And these PPAs include both thermal, renewable, and storage resources, and some of these resources may provide seasonal or ELCC adjusted capacity value to the system, which is less than the nameplate capacity.
Correct. There aren't renewable only resources that we're seeking. There are renewables with some storage, but yes, it's thermal and BESS. Well, not on the PPA. So it's storage. It's storage in the PPAs and thermal. We're asking for additional sum on all of them.
Regarding the BESS resources, some of these may have a larger nameplate value than the firm capacity value considered in the company's planning analysis, correct?
From a capacity equivalence, well, specifically for BESS projects, there's two potential ELCC adjustments. One is the sort of core ELCC analysis that generally represents that the more like-kind energy limited resources that you add to a system, the less valuable the incremental one is. And we had an ELCC process that was reviewed with staff and the IE, agreed upon for the evaluation. And so some of the best resources have an ELCC that's less than 100%. Secondly, some of the resources that the PPAs represent are paired with existing solar resources that are already receiving some capacity value. So when you add a battery to a facility that's already receiving some capacity value, you need to be careful not to double count. So there's potentially a secondary adjustment made to represent the fact that some of the capacity that that shared point of interconnection facility can provide was already allocated to solar. So you have those two impacts that provide sort of the final incremental reliable capacity that would be used in the resource ledger purposes.
And the reason we're here today is because of a capacity need, or this company's forecast capacity need, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So the adjusted capacity value is an important part of the evaluation of determining how many resources are needed, correct?
Yes, we capture capacity for all of them.
So in this case, wouldn't it be reasonable for the commission to base the additional sum on the firm capacity value when setting the amount of the additional sum at site hearing?
No, our recommendation is at nameplate. I know that subject to check, I think on the renewable RFPAs, which have, factor or capacity equivalence adjustments, we still get that on nameplate. So, just because the unit has a different capacity equivalent, you still get the value of that 4-hour battery for heat, your arbitrage, operating reserves, and all the other aspects. So our recommendation is for nameplate to be consistent with how we've done solar.
But you do agree that the proposed resources, especially the near best projects, are fully deliverable at that instant.
That doesn't take away the fact that they are contributing and they provide options and energy arbitrage have opportunities. But yeah, we capture that in the evaluation and we capture that in the.
Regarding the PPAs, the company believes it would be beneficial to have some of the certified resources be based on PPAs, correct?
You say that again? Sorry.
But regarding the PPAs, the company believes it would be beneficial to have some of the certified resources be PPAs.
Yeah, I mean, that was what was proposed in. We selected PPAs. I mean, yes, I mean, your question is, do we prefer it? That's what was bid in was selected.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the company's objective is to identify the lowest cost portfolio of resources that are available to us. Generally speaking, that does include some PPAs. And I think we do appreciate the diversity of ownership that provides, but it's not necessarily an objective function for the evaluation or a requirement for the PPA to be, for the RFP to be successful.
Well, won't the PPAs help reduce the company's risk of having so much on its plate to minimize construction delays and other risks?
Some-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that lends itself to the diversity, the resource diversity that Mr. Looney spoke to. And the contracting diversity is very important to us. And the way that we are able to call on specific resources at different times, the contracting provisions we have for PPAs is specific, and that's different from how we're able to operate the owned assets as well. So that just is an element of the diversity that Mr. Looney is.
Yeah, and we do value. If you look at how many are in the last 20 years and the fact that we've got, up to the 30% in some years, there's a lot of ways. But this certification is a combination of all of those.
I do think it would be an error if you simply say a PPA is less risky than a company-owned facility. They have different risks. And so the diversity of risk could potentially lower the overall magnitude of risk, but any individual project that's a PPA is not necessarily less risky than an individual project that's a company-owned facility.
I have one more exhibit that I want to show you all, in my STF, GIA 10. I've been divided in 24. You all may have referenced this earlier. Ask a couple questions. This, one of the commissioners might have asked, earlier, how will GPC, asked, how will GPC change its plans if the projected load growth materializes slower than anticipated, or some of the load doesn't materialize at all? Yeah. And the company's response was a list of possible options, reducing in size, needs of procuring, future requests for proposals, delay, timing of future RFPs, involves delay, cancel resources being constructed, accelerated load ramps, for load changes, we're evaluating resource programs, we're selling capacity beyond what is needed to satisfy the return reserve market. See those, I think that.
Yes, I think it's important to note that prior to listening to those options, we said we would update it in our annual planning process to see if there's action for the community. Yes, we did those things.
And I think this is something that I asked during the IRP, right? But I just wanted to ask you again. Have the company's resource and plans to develop a formal plan for implementing these measures if the load from the large load customers does not materialize as forecast, including a priority of action to be taken corresponding to methods developed from the forecast or from actual things taken? That's not a formal plan.
Yeah, no, we don't. I mean, our plan is the one that we brought to the commission, where the load forecast supports the need for the certification of the 9,900 plus megawatts. So we have not done a formal, because we understand that what we have in our case supports the resources we need. We have sold, through SWE, the commission property rules in the 23-hour update. We had the Mississippi and Center Road, the PPAs, that we contracted for 5 years. We didn't need them from the first year, but the target reserve arm standpoint, and we sold those, as some other local entities. So we have not put together a formal plan, because again, it's going to be based on what comes out of this filing procedure. But we do not have a formal plan laid out if the loads are going to show up. We know these are options, and as things change and as things adjust, we'll adjust, because we're looking at it at least annually, if not more.
Yeah, we do have an annual planning process that accounts for the latest load forecast available every year. We very formally file an IRP every 3 years that would account for the latest load forecast, the resource ledger, and any modifications that the company would deem to be appropriate. So while we haven't developed that formal plan today, there's a well-established process in place that would accommodate the formalization of those plans as they become appropriate, with the full oversight and approval of the commission.
Which is what we know in the first part action.
Mr. Chairman, those are all the questions that I have for the panel. I was pleased that staff's cross-examination exhibits to be entered into the record as well. Gentlemen and ladies, I appreciate you answering staff's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we've got a, Mr. Jones. Trying to get a little idea on time, because we're gonna have a hard stop in about 5:40. So maybe better just go ahead and stop here. So the George Interfaith Tower and Light, y'all want to go until then, or wait till start the moment? That everyone's in agreement with taking a break at this point. That also will give staff a little more time to make sure they've got everything tweaked on the audio system. So I appreciate their efforts. Thanks for everybody's time, panel. Let y'all be excused during the morning. You'll get back started at 9:30, and hopefully we can I would just go ahead and tell you, be prepared to possibly stay later tomorrow if needed. So it's close. We'll try to get it finished. Okay. Thank y'all very much. We'll see y'all in the morning.